I'm going to specifically talk about science today because that's what I'm passionate about, and that's a lot of what Labster does. But hello, everyone. I'm Maaroof. I'm actually based in Switzerland, although I'm Australian, which you can probably hear. So I hope you can understand my strange dialect of English. I'm part of the founding team at Labster, which is a European education company. It started about in 2013. We're now about 300 people, I think, and we make digital science labs to help science professors make better use of their face-to-face time with students by augmenting it with technology. A small disclaimer though, I love science. I grew up watching Mythbusters, where they destroy things in the name of science. And my personal mission is kind of showing as many people how fun science can be, really, and how engaging it can be taught. So I'm a little bit biased, I think, in how universities can use the idea of the Eduverse and technology to support teaching in STEM. I'm a very kind of hands-on science presenter, you could say. I used to have a job where I'd actually have to dress up as characters and similar and do kind of interactive science shows and workshops with students of all ages where, things explode and students get to try kind of wild experiments. And I took the blame a lot of the time if something didn't go wrong, like something exploded or it made a big mess. These were very physical, immersive experiences that included, storytelling and these types of things. And to me, what I've seen is like these are the types of things that make students' eyes light up when you're teaching science. It makes them curious and ultimately opens them up to the learning. But there is some challenges with that, which I'll talk about as we go. So you might think that the idea of the eduverse and similar, or using technology or doing things digitally in general wouldn't really sit well with me because I have a very strong need and desire to do hands-on activities. But over the years, I've sort of discovered that really it does offer us a lot of opportunity. And that's what a lot of the speakers have spoken about already. Obviously, it can help us scale the reach, doing things digitally, scale the reach of our teaching. But where I think it gets really exciting is how we can use it to go far beyond what's physically possible, especially in science, and enhance the precious in-person teacher-student time that happens often in the lab or in class. So I hope that's what I can convince you of today. So what we've done at Labster is take one of the earliest forms of the hybrid learning concept, the flight simulator, which is actually about 100 years old, and apply it to the teaching of science at university and high school. This is not a new concept. These types of simulators get used a lot already in the teaching of STEM. But instead of just recreating the kind of lab experience that's often in science and engineering subjects one-to-one, we wanted to really go further and use the digital experience to kind of explore the full potential of engaging students to really complement the face-to-face lab experience or face-to-face time teachers might have. So what we've kind of built runs across devices, and it looks a little bit like this. I'm going to play a video. You won't have to hear me talking the whole time. There'll be two other speakers. So let's see if this works. Get the sound going.
Sound is not going, but we still see it. But I hear a strange noise in the background. I think it might be your microphone. We can hear you clearly, or I can hear you clearly.
Then you just explain what's happening. As you can see, it's a full lab experience. They're usually 20 to 40 minutes, and a student kind of plays a game where they go through scenarios, they interact with the lab equipment, they are able to zoom into the molecular level. There's an inbuilt textbook as well where they can look up theory, and then it's assessed and graded along the way as well to examine how well the student is mastering the concepts by prompting them with questions and immediately giving them feedback on how they're doing in the lab. And what's I think interesting about this is you can explore so many different scenarios that may not be available to a student typically in with their facilities, especially around the world where some classes don't have access to these types of labs. And this is what we've really tried to do, is kind of highlight the things that can't be done in the lab and build them into an experience which kind of melds together the microscopic and the context, etc. and kind of a very seamless experience that can be plugged directly into a course. So I'll go through kind of some of the key things, because I get quite excited about very specific things in this. And in my mind, there's a lot of unique things that can add to the learning space when you develop kind of experiences like this. The first, I think, is the scenarios we use. These are kind of immersive scenarios that we build in sort of in a gaming platform, and these kind of give students context. This kind of gives them a chance to take the lab experience and really apply it directly to a real world problem, which is often something that now gets used more and more in teaching, is like problem-based learning, and really trying to tie create an applied scenario for students to use. So we might have them analyzing a sample on Mars and then going back in the lab and kind of looking at the sample and determining if there's water, for example, or treating a patient in hospital. And this for me is really powerful. It's both for their imagination, but it also immediately reinforces the why of why they're learning a particular subject. And in my experience, for teachers, this can be very hard to do in the classroom. It's definitely possible, and teachers can do it, but for students, it can sometimes seem a bit abstract. So I think the digital experience really helps with this this component. The other thing which I really love is that we try to capture the beauty of learning through discovery. And so in one of the simulations we've built, the students that are in first year ecology at university, they actually visit an untouched environment on a new planet, and they apply like real ecological techniques in this kind of simulation to examine an entirely new ecosystem with new life forms, and they collect samples. So they actually learn the techniques that they would do in the real job on Earth, but there's like an added spark to it. And I think this kind of is something that is very challenging to do. And I think that, the technologies that we have now can really help enhance the learning in this way. The bonus is that actually they can't Google the answers either, because a lot of these things are imaginary. And this sort of strikes a chord with some of the teachers who are worried about students being able to sort of cheat when they're online. On the kind of really practical side, a lot of our professors and administrators sort of love this component, but there's much less waste, especially with expensive consumables. But the more important thing is students get to repeat the experiments several times before they do it in real life. So they really understand what they're doing, and there's much less chance of them wasting things like plastics and gas, etc. I'm a big fan of making a mess in the lab, for sure, based on my background, but it can get expensive over time. So what this sort of environment does is it gives them a chance to practice, to make mistakes in a very safe and self-paced environment, where then when they come into the lab, they're much more confident to do the experiment, and they start to connect the dots better. This one to me is the most important one. I worked with some dangerous substances as a science presenter, and some things have gone wrong, but they can actually make mistakes in these environments and not get injured, which usually everyone appreciates. Learning by failure is a really important part of science, but it's really hard to do, at least ethically. So we kind of give students a chance of getting it wrong. They can see what happens, and then they can sort of try again to avoid the mistake. We don't always do this. It's only in kind of specific cases where we think making a mistake adds value. It's not a free-for-all for students, because sometimes they get lost. It is a semi-guided experience, but there are moments where they can do something wrong, something can blow up, they're explained why, and then they're able to repeat it again, especially in situations where it's very dangerous. In one of our labs, it's a safety lab actually, there's actually an accident that happens, and it gets acid in the student's eye, and they get to see what that looks like. And so the screen goes all blurry, and they have to quickly get to the wash basin to clean it out in time, otherwise they go blind. And it's a little bit cheeky, but it really does give students this experience of urgency, which is something you can create, an emotional response, and a seriousness to lab safety, which is very challenging to do when you have, just a safety manual or similar. So I think these types of things is where technology can really add value to the classroom, rather than just being a carbon copy of what's already taught in the lab. Obviously, I'm sure many of your imaginations have gone here, we can also build into the experiences modeling and visualizations of the invisible, which is often very hard for students to grasp because they're often abstract concepts. And there are a lot of videos and images kind of on YouTube, etc., that do this already. But I think what's really exciting about this type of technology is you can integrate it into the experience itself. So when they do the experiment, they can then zoom in at that time in the and see what's happening, while they're doing it. And that really reinforces the learning. And then when they come into the lab, they can already imagine what's happening in their experiment when they're actually doing it face to face. And this is very hard to do, when you're actually in the lab and you're busy sort of doing the experiments physically. But this way you can prepare the students, you can give them that conceptual understanding before they then step in and take care of the actual lab work. This one's a bit more of a practical sort of note. Not all universities, as I'm sure you're aware, have the capabilities to change their infrastructure every time there's a new piece of equipment in the industry. And now it's changing so rapidly that it's very hard for campuses to keep up, or they simply can't afford enough of these equipments, like a ultrasonicator. I don't even know what that does, but I know it's expensive. They can't afford so many of them for every student. So this is where a tool like this, and I think the Eduverse, or whatever we decide to call it over time, it can really bridge the gap to help students kind of get this experience and work with equipment that's much closer to what they're going to experience when they leave university and go into the workforce. We model it off the latest equipment that's out there in the industry, and although this can sometimes backfire a little bit, some students have asked our university professors, why the equipment in their actual campus doesn't look as fancy or shiny as the virtual stuff, which is quite funny, but that's actually quite rare, to be honest. I won't go into super depth on the content. We've been at this for a long time. We've made hundreds of different simulations that last kind of 20 to 40 minutes. On average, what we've seen is teachers use between 5 or 10 of these per course that they teach. That way, it's much more of a blend, and they don't have to completely rebuild things from the ground up, their infrastructure or their courses, etc. So it really gives teachers the flexibility to incorporate, just a couple here or there if they're not comfortable with the technology yet, or, take a whole suite of 10 and really build a course around it. And it really varies depending on their preference. I'll talk very quickly about kind of the student impact. It wouldn't be a STEM talk without a graph or two. So there are lots of journal studies out there already that shows combining kind of digital and physical experiences together improves learning outcomes, and actually several published about sort of our lab simulations themselves. But this one to me is my favorite, and I'll tell you why in a second. It's a study published in BMC Medical Education Journal by a European research team that were using Labster and kind of evaluating the impact of them. They divided a group of students into 3 groups based on their existing knowledge about a subject that they gained over the course of a semester. And you can see like the blue line are the kind of the ones at the top of the class, red in the middle, and the green lines are more the lower performing students according to the testing standards. And then they measured them after kind of using the lab sims in a course, and they compared the groups, and the students that typically were kind of on the low end, they actually caught up and improved much faster than the others. And this in itself isn't super surprising, but what was really kind of, to me, very interesting is when we looked at kind of motivation and self-efficacy, which is their belief in their own abilities, particularly on the right-hand side of this graph is where you see the self-efficacy. That low-performing group, which is the green line, they shot up in their terms of their confidence level, even taking over some of the other groups. Now, in science, belief in your own abilities is really critical. Across the whole kind of learning experience in general, in any subject, it's really important. But it's especially important, I think, in science, where results don't always turn out the way you expect. So that confidence in what you've done to generate those results is actually very important. And this is why I believe, in my view, the trend of using these types of technologies is here to stay, because it has an impact that's far beyond the learning of the knowledge itself. It actually generates motivation, and it creates this confidence in students so that when they go into the next subject or the next topic, they've got a lot more confidence in their abilities. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought you were done, but probably I don't know how many slides you still have.
I have just a short video to play after this, actually, if that's all right.
Is it fine to probably skip that video so we have a little bit more time to
sure.
to share with the whole discussion? We're running a little bit late on the time.
No problem.
Oh,
Then I'll just
fine.
wrap up with this. This is just interesting in terms of the trend on how something like this is being adopted pre-COVID and post-COVID. Before, like in 2016, 2017 school year, we had kind of 40,000 students using this type of tool. It was doubling every year until COVID. And you can see that the big jump at 2019, 2020, all of a sudden it's rocketed up, which is not super surprising, but it's definitely increasing as well. So this is, I think, becoming a trend. And we're already seeing this year that although it's sort of not as steep an adoption curve, it is still increasing at that steady rate. So I think this trend is kind of here to stay for sure. So I'll wrap up there and we can go to the discussion.